Then comes along the idea for that novel, A Land Remembered, which covers 110 years of Florida pioneer life, 1858 to 1968. Well, you can't do what I did for those other novels. You can't go out and live among people who were on this earth 150 or more years ago in order to get to know them well enough to write about them, unless you've got a time machine, which I so happen not to have. So I had to go about that research in a different way. The research alone for that novel took a period of more than 2 years. I read about 60 books about Florida, took pounds and pounds of notes. And from all those things I read, I found a lot of things about Florida that were of real interest to me. Things I knew I wanted to put into that novel, like the Battle of Olustee in the Civil War, the birth of the cattle industry, the birth of the citrus industry, the coming of the railroads, that great freeze in 1895 that almost destroyed this entire state, that land boom in Miami in the 1920s, that 1926 hurricane that almost blew Miami right off the map, that 1928 hurricane that swept over Lake Okeechobee and drowned more than 2,000 people in less than 2 hours. But I wasn't really interested in historical facts, you know, dates, times, places, that sort of thing. You can find that in the history book. What I really wanted to know was, how did these things affect people? How did they survive? Why did those pioneers come to Florida in the first place when it was such a wilderness? What were they looking for? What were their hopes? What were their dreams? How did they really live back in those pioneer days? And that's the sort of thing you cannot find in a history book. So most of that novel is told through memories. Some my own, but mostly the memories of other people. Many of the old pioneer families, especially those that were pioneers in cattle, have identified with the characters in this novel, and they think it's them. And they'll call me on the phone and say, "Mr. Smith, I want to thank you for writing that book about my family." And I always say, "Well, you're welcome. I was glad to do so." But the characters in that novel are not based on one family. They're composites of typical Florida pioneers. The phone rang one night, and I knew it was really late. And I turned on the lamp, and it was 1 o'clock in the morning. And I said, "Well, if this is somebody selling aluminum siding at 1 o'clock, we're going to have some fun." And I answered the phone, and it was a lady who lived out in the country from St. Cloud. She said, "Mr. Smith, I want to apologize for calling you this late, but my daddy is 90 years old, and I just finished reading him A Land Remembered. Would you talk to him on the phone?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, put him on." The old fellow started talking. I didn't even really need a telephone. I didn't need Bell South. I could hear him without a telephone from St. Cloud up to Merritt Island. He was talking real loud. And he said, "Mr. Smith, I want to thank you for putting my daddy's old homestead house in that book." He said, "You described that house right down to the last peg and the last homemade cypress shingle on the roof." And then he said, "But that old house is so far out in the woods, how did you ever find it?" And I said, "Well, I was down there in Osceola County one afternoon just walking around by myself in the woods. I saw this old house and stopped and took a few notes. I'd never seen that man's house. Here again, that homestead house in that novel was just a typical Florida homestead house. Well, if it made some 90-year-old man happy that I had put his daddy's old house in the book, so be it. I never told him any different.
You can tell he has a good sense of humor.